Good morning. It is the 4th of May, 2025. I am Cherian George. I'm part of a collective called Academia SG, which also includes Linda Lim, Yenn, and Chong Yenn. Welcome to our post-GE webinar. We don't normally wake up this early, but so forgive all of us if we appear groggy and slightly incoherent, but we still felt it would be helpful to talk about what's happened yesterday, polling day, with some of the brightest minds that we can find. Of course, there are many more, but 9 is already plenty. Well, 8 plus me is already plenty. So I don't think I'll need to introduce the topic. I'm going to dive right in and start introducing our guests. Our first pair of panelists, Bertha Henson and Walid Jumblatt Abdullah. Welcome, Bertha and Walid. Bertha and Walid, have been taking part in an occasional webinar series, or rather a podcast series called Bertha Meets Walid, BMW, which, as far as I'm concerned, has been the Rolls-Royce of political commentary over this campaign period. Great pleasure to meet two great friends. Bertha, of course, is a former Straits Times journalist whom I worked with in the 1990s. I'm very sure on this panel, Bertha has the most experience following elections. Since should I reveal it? Yes, I will.
Stop.
Since the late 1980s, right? So my first was in 1991. Bertha is also the author of the book GE2020, Fair or Foul. Walid Jumblatt Abdullah is probably the most sought after political commentator over the last more than 1 week. So very grateful that he's made time for us. In fact, he's got to leave early because he's rushing off for a book talk, which starts at 1 p.m. for his latest book, Why Palestine. Walid, of course, is the host of Taib, for a change. Well, not really for a change, but he could as easily be the interviewer, but today he doesn't get to be. Instead, I get to interview him. Yeah. So for those of you who are familiar with the BMW concept, it devoted half an hour to discussing 3 times 2, 6 talking points from the recent what's been happening on the campaign front. I don't think we'll have time to give you a time for 6, but I'm going to start right away and ask you, maybe starting with Bertha. Journalists are known to write the first draft of history. So what does that draft look like to you this morning?
Oh, that depends, whether I'm writing officially or unofficially. No, for
You're
me,
going to write honestly and sincerely.
Oh, okay, honesty. Okay, for me, it was such a confounding election. I mean, this is an election where a new prime minister in an old party has basically improved his party vote, So it's basically, I don't understand this because, that means I read the room wrongly. I don't even feel I should be here, because if I've analyzed it wrongly, I don't know what else I can get wrong by speaking now, So basically, well, I congratulate him. It does mean that, within the PAP, his base is consolidated. Yeah. There were a lot of talk about, how he has to do it to get a good mandate and, or his position in the PAP itself might be compromised. In fact, I think that was the reason, well, not directly related to PAP, that's the reason why he got such a big share, the PAP. I think it's simply because, okay, I'm sorry for saying this, but I think it's because his posters are everywhere. Okay, I mean, so basically his posters are everywhere. He's a new guy. And people say, oh yeah, the new guy here, maybe we should give him a chance. And they went for it. I'm not sure this narrative about stormy water and everything, weather, navigation really works here. Yeah. But, let's see what it says. Can't hear you.
Prof. Cherian, yeah.
I'm not worth hearing. Okay,
Yeah.
I think you raised a couple of very frank points, starting with the point that actually we don't know a lot,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
A lot of this is a hunch. I mean, why did the votes work out this way? And I
Yeah.
think it's important to foreground the next 2 hours with that very clear admission, right?
Right.
We don't have exit polls in this country. Maybe some people do it, but we don't, right? So often what we're going to see over the next few weeks or months is different pundits as well as interested parties trying to interpret the results to their own advantage, right? Spin it. And you've been honest enough to say, actually, we don't know, but here's one possibility that maybe is because Lawrence Wong was so prominent. The last time a prime minister, I think, more explicitly made the election about him, that was Goh Chok Tong, you remember, who in one election actually said, I am contesting in every constituency. Lawrence Wong, I think, quite smartly didn't do that. It was more
Yes.
about
Yeah, but I think there was something else as well. I noticed that his colleagues also didn't quite do that, which I thought was a little weird. I thought there would be a very big vote getter, but this focus on the team and leaders and all that. I would have just gone out and say, hey, look, you have a new prime minister. This is my new boss. Support him lah.
Right.
But
I suspect they learned from Goh Chok Tong's mistake because he probably overplayed that. Right?
Okay.
Possibly, I don't know. But yeah, thanks for those initial thoughts. Walid?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts. So one, it is a real mandate for PM Lawrence Wong, above 65%, beyond the wildest imaginations. And like Bertha, I got a few things wrong, some things right, but a few things horribly wrong. Especially, I couldn't imagine that Prof. Tumbaya would get below percent. That was just not on my bingo card, I suppose. So some things wrong. It's a real mandate for M. Lawrence Wong, and that should actually strengthen his position because he promised a more open Singapore, more listening. And I think now it strengthens his position in society, but also in his party. Look, you have to listen to me now. This is the way forward. This approach works. Because I also had worried if his personal vote share had decreased, and Bertha and I discussed this before, if his personal vote share decreased in his constituency and then the national average decreased, then people would say, see, your openness wouldn't work. That's why we need to go back to old school hard knocks. But it has also, hopefully, that is the path forward. The other thing is, I would say that, and now we are, maybe a lot of us, a lot of viewers at the first stage of grief, right? So we are still at denial stage. So so some of the things that, especially yesterday when I was doing the Jom live stream, a lot of people were saying gerrymandering is the number one factor gerrymandering is a factor that explains this the most. And I would say it's not. No, it did affect results. Of course it did. But in terms of vote share, I don't think you can just spin the national swing based on gerrymandering, because gerrymandering affects, firstly, constituencies more than national vote share. And secondly, the 9 constituencies that didn't see any redrawing of boundaries, 2 of them were Workers' Party, like 7, including Bukit Panjang. All of them, the PAP did better than they did the previous time. So all of them. So you cannot say that is because of gerrymandering, because that didn't happen for those 7. And in fact, in Jalan Besar, Josephine Teo's team got more than Taman's team ever did, including in 2020. I would just like us to pause a bit for some reflection, right? So does that mean that Josephine Teo is more popular than Taman, or is seen as than Taman by everybody? So that's the first thing. Then the other, if I could, just one more point, Prof, or are you gonna ask?
Oh, please go ahead. Yeah, please. Brief,
So WP's strong performance and PSP's, I think PSP is gone as a party because they didn't win, Progress Singapore Party. But WP actually, in terms of vote share in the constituencies, they contested against the PAP. They got slightly more than the PAP. So they are still the brand name. Their big moving Faisal to Tampines almost paid off. It did pay off in a sense that they got the NCMP seat from Tampines, so to some extent. But it showed that also there are other things that factor, for instance, groundwork, because the PAP both sold Baey Yam Keng and Sun Xueling as the chairman, chairperson of their town councils if they were to be elected. Because by all accounts, Bayam King and Sun Xueling are the two most on-the-ground MPs in their own constituencies. So maybe that is what people value, right? Rightly or wrongly, maybe that is what people value. So I would say Bayam King and Sun Xueling in many ways were carrying the teams in their constituencies. Just the idea of WP being the strongest party, and it has, but now it has 12 seats in parliament, 2 NCMP seats and 10 seats that it retained. I think parliament is actually worse off without another party. I would have, not that, of course, if you win, you deserve it, right? But if SDP...
I think you're frozen, but let me complete the thought.
Okay.
I think you're saying that Parliament might have been more interesting to Chee Soon Juan in it.
Yes, yes, yeah, or another party other than the WP. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that last point. I think that's a kind of a loss for Parliament's diversity. Well, one thing that makes me different from Bertha and Walid is that I don't have to admit that I'm wrong, because I never made a bet. Right? I was quite open to the possibility that it would be status quo. Yeah, both of you have raised what this will do to Lawrence Wong's personal standing. That's a hugely important question. We're gonna spend a lot more time at the tail end of our 2 hours discussing that in depth, including maybe tips on who she should have in cabinet, etc. Who knows where this panel will go, right? But I do want to, Walid, you mentioned the vote share a couple of times, and here is where maybe my view is a little different. And I'm voicing this difference partly to show that, we're not guilty of groupthink in this panel, right? So we have a diversity of views. So I'm going to actually contradict you, okay? And say that the results, although they have been interpreted as dramatic, there's actually another way to read them, yeah? Of course, there are media that have called it a landslide, yeah, both Straits Times and Channel News Asia, foreign media as well, BBC, Guardian. I think actually, Lawrence Wong has not used the term landslide, and I think his is a more defensible assessment. He calls it a clear and strong mandate. Yeah, a clear signal of trust, stability, and confidence in your government. Yeah. So why is it that I don't think that it is actually a landslide? I care a lot about metaphors, right? Because they can. And cliches, because they are easy, but they can actually be quite misleading. To me, a landslide is a sudden dramatic shift of the ground. So what is the sudden dramatic shift of the ground? It might be shocking, but it's only shocking to those who got it wrong. Yeah. Like I said, we don't have polls to tell us what the state of public opinion actually was. Yeah. So whether it is stunning or shocking, even that is kind of subjective. It may say more about the assessor and the electorate. Why do I not think it's a landslide, contrary to the conventional wisdom that is being pushed out by media, is this. The other way I would read it is basically that, hey, in 2020, the opposition took 10 seats from the government, and the PAP got 6 out of 10 votes. In this election, the opposition got 10 seats from the government, and the PAP won 6.5 out of 10. That doesn't sound like a landslide to me.
Yeah.
So I think it is a landslide relative to expectations. It's not objectively a landslide, right? So ironically, if these same results had happened in 2020, nobody would have used it as said that it was a landslide.
Correct.
Right? It's only a landslide because we expected the momentum to continue.
Yeah.
So to me, the real, I would read it. And again, I want to emphasize that we are all like feeling our way in the dark, right? Because we don't have exit polls, etc. But my best guess is that this is actually a status quo vote. It's not a landslide, it's a status quo vote. It is a vote in favor of the status quo in terms of ruling party. It is also a vote in favor of the opposition status quo. And this, I think, has been under noticed by the media so far. Let me pull up this data, right?
Yeah.
The Workers' Party vote share in seats that it contested in 2020, 50.49. This year, basically no difference, 50.04, in spite of contesting 30% more seats. So, I mean, as you know, if you're going to contest a significantly larger terrain, you would expect your vote share to go down, but it is maintained. Yeah. So how is this a rebuff of the WP? The WP has actually withstood the trend. So I think the fuller story, the way I read it, is that what we see is, yes, a strong vote for the PAP status quo, greater discernment, not for the first time, but it's accentuated. Voters no longer are in the protest vote mode. And I think this is why in the past, we used to put such great stock in the vote share, because we assume that the vote share is a proxy approval rating of the government. Because most votes in the 1990s were protest votes. We don't really care about quality of opposition. I think the protest vote component in the Singapore electorate has dramatically shrunk. And now people are making positive votes for opposition they like. And ironically, precisely because the Workers' Party has been so impressive, it's made the other parties look so bad. Which may exactly be why suddenly you're beginning to see the PAP getting like 80% and figures that it wouldn't have gotten in the days of the protest vote. And you're beginning to see these paradoxes, like even Tharman's record-breaking vote being beaten. Yeah, so that's my reading of it. I want to get another of our colleagues in. Ian, are you there? Can you? Because I'm sure you've got stuff to say about this. Yenn, do you want to jump in on this point?
Yeah, so actually, I think many people were talking about a landslide last night. I actually didn't think so. I mean, the PAP did really well, but their overall vote share was 65%, which is, better than the 60% in 2020.
61.
But I think it's not, it doesn't get close to, if we look at Tharman's presidential vote, which is a national vote, it's about 70%. So I think that's the 5% difference is what they could have achieved, but they did not. I agree with Cherian that there is a status quo bias, or I would say a flight to familiarity. Singaporean voters are notoriously, I've said this, has been rewarded in Straits Times, notoriously risk averse and skittish. So some of you might have heard the term kia su, kia si, kia jing hu, right? So scared of losing, scared of dying, scared of the government. That's one way that people have described Singaporeans. I think that translates into some of our voting behavior. So at a time of uncertainty, there is a search for something that's familiar. And it so happens that the Workers' Party has entrenched themselves as a familiar face, so to speak. And I think that's reflected in the vote share that Cherian had just talked about. I think also when you look at the Workers' Party performance in several constituencies, they actually improved their vote. So I think that's the sort of familiarity aspect of it.
And the vote share bump, let's be clear, is what? It's just 4 points.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, my hunch is that we need to stop looking at the vote share as approval rating proxy. And actually, it is highly sensitive to the quality of opposition challenge.
If I could maybe push back a little on that, on what you said,
thank you,
and Prof. Yenn Chong as well. So the Workers' Party has always been much stronger than the other opposition parties. There have always been mosquito parties, and we have to thank Bertha for popularizing that that phrase in the lexicon. So gap has always been there. It was there in 2020.
Historical point. Before Bertha cuts you off, I will, because I'm older than Bertha, or as old as Bertha, right? Always is relative.
Okay.
So we remember very clearly a time when the Workers' Party was unelectable.
Right. So let's
And
use,
SDP was the party in town. Yeah.
if we use
Mm.
2011, Workers' Party has been stronger, and this our best reference point is 2020 as well, both for flight to familiarity and for being stronger than other opposition parties. So RDU, Red Dot United, just started 4 weeks or 6 weeks before the 2020 general election, up against Taman, and Taman got 75%. So there is something still in the vote share. I understand that maybe we would like to downplay it. I don't think that it's so easily downplayed. I think for sure the Workers' Party strength, we've talked about it already, but the other parties, including SDP as well, have basically got a thrashing, right? So I think there is something in the general mood as well. We cannot just easily explain away by saying that the vote share doesn't matter, because a constant cannot explain variation. 2020 and 2025, the gap between WP and the other opposition parties was already there. So I'm not sure whether that can explain the variation that we see today.
Maybe I'm more concerned. Sorry, Cherian, can I join
Oh,
in?
please, yes.
I'm more concerned about, what was said about the Workers' Party's candidates and their credentials. They're all like very good people. You see, the flip side has happened. Nobody really looked at the PAP side of candidates, did they? I mean, essentially, what it's come down to is your anchor is the one who's holding everybody up. We take a look at everybody on the WP slate and slate, say, oh, this one got this, got this, got this. But, we really don't pay much attention to the others on the PAP slate. So
That's your real free pass, right?
Huh? Yeah,
That's your real free pass.
that is the free pass, exactly what I want to say. So we are giving a free pass to the newbies. And the newbies are supposed to be your people who are going to do the renewal, right? But, you don't really see much renewing in the campaign. It's all the heavyweight ministers doing the heavy lifting. And basically it's what they did not do that seems to be more important. No, they didn't do so much smearing. They didn't put Joe Teo up. They didn't put Vivian up. All the lightning rod people put away. The newbies didn't have really much chance to make a mistake. So basically, I think the position has been reversed. It is now for the PAP to basically take a stronger look at its own people. And I worry, because if I look at the 2020 batch, it's more or less the same thing. A big slate of newbies came in. But you look at their parliamentary record, not so hot, no? And then basically 6 people or so went off. Some of them are retained. Nobody really talks about their parliamentary record, but they're not that great, no?
So, can I
Yeah.
comment on this? I think for the PAP, yes, there's the free pass thing, but we sometimes look a lot at candidates in Singapore, but what we also tend to forget is party machinery.
Sure.
Is what, sorry?
Party machinery, machine politics, right? So the PAP by far has the most mature party machine. So it's easier for them to push out whatever candidate. Plus, there's the assumption that they know what they're doing. So when party machinery, I'm talking about the grassroots. I'm talking about their whole sort of army of volunteers essentially. So they are able to do far more in terms of voter outreach in ways that I think compensates for the candidates. Whereas for smaller parties, and I would include the WP here too, they have a lot of volunteers and all that, of course, but it doesn't match the PAP. So how they compete, they'll have to talk about a lot more about their candidate quality. So I think it's not an apples to apples comparison. There are different dynamics that are inherent to the different ways that the parties are structured and their different assets and liabilities. Yeah.
Right. And the party machinery gap would be especially significant in the larger the constituency is, right?
That's right.
Which I wonder was a factor in Paul Tambaya's unexpectedly performance. Because if I'm not wrong, he's in the biggest SMC.
Yes, 33,000.
Right? Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge SMC.
Yeah, so Bukit Panjang. But again, that machinery, so the comparison is 2020. He got 46% in 2020.
The 2020 is a bit different because the machinery cannot work in the same way. There was a COVID election.
No, I get it. But he has had 5 years to be more familiar to the voters. 5 years, and he, by his own admission, he does a lot of groundwork, a lot of block visits. So I'm not sure whether the machinery explanation can explain. And the
Well, I don't.
machinery explanation also cannot explain the variation in PAP candidates as well. So I think Bertha's overarching point still remains, right? Because for all of the machinery, Ng Chee Meng got whatever he got.
Okay, so I think for the machinery, I think is a base argument. There's going to be variation around the machinery argument, based on the candidates. But in terms of your baseline, the PAP will start off with an advantage. I think in when we talk about party machinery, yes, it's not about an individual candidate or the immediate group around them doing block visits. There, Paul Tobias obviously did a lot, but it's what else you're doing on the ground all the time. What other kinds of activities you're presenting
You're
there?
talking about the community stuff, is it? The
Yeah, a
one
lot of
by
that's your party machinery. That's your machine
Exactly.
politics.
The network is very big. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I agree. By the way, I don't think Walid, you're quite correct. I mean, I won't entirely agree with you that the gerrymandering or boundaries thing did not have an effect. They did lah.
They did.
I think the PS is. I think it's probably quite responsible for the demise of the PSP.
Yeah,
In fact, I think the PSP is going to split.
I agree.
And basically for Bukit Panjang, yeah, it was surprising, but I think maybe we should come down to crediting the incumbent MP for
Yeah.
doing the job. And COVID-19, you must remember, Paul Tobias was everywhere. So, the familiarity level was also very high. So people know of him even if you don't live there, So there are other factors in play. So the boundaries one, to me, was one. The second one was over the CCs. So, in fact, I think we should take advantage, or rather the politicians should take advantage of what Lawrence Wong said, that he will allow a debate, on the role of the PA, on the CCs, and whether or not, it should be opened up. I mean, if he wants an open political system and he serves Singaporeans equally, then something must be done there. So I would put him on the spot on it.
Before we close the subject of the boundaries, I think if I gather the threads that you brought up so far, I think Walid is right that the boundary redrawing logically would make no difference to the vote share, right? Because it's still talking about total number of votes, wherever they are, right? But they could make significant difference to individual races. Yeah. And so in that sense, I think Dr. Chee Soon Juan last night, who was, of course, very upset about this, is raising a valid point.
Yeah, he has every right to be. I think he has been hard done by the redrawing. And maybe, I think our segment is going to end in a bit, is it?
No, sure.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
I wanted to say also, looking forward, right? Because looking at what has happened in the elections, I think it's also an opportune time. Just now, Bertha already mentioned we should ask the PM for this. So I think there are a few institutional reforms that we really need to think about.
Right.
So the NMP scheme, I think, is something that we really need to discuss or later on as a nation. The EBRC and the independence of the committee, because that leads to all these questions about unfairness and gerrymandering. And I think cooling off day needs to go, to be honest, because that gives mainstream media an unfair advantage, the ruling party an unfair advantage through mainstream media. And then, of course, people in associated with the establishment will say, but social media favors the opposition. They say, okay, we are not paying for social media. That's the first thing. But second thing, if you remove that, then that advantage goes away as well. And then the third one is the GRC, and Bertha and I have discussed this at great length. It forces us to choose between candidates we like and candidates we don't like, as in choose them together. So if somebody likes Bayam King in Tampines but may not like Bayam King's partner, and then that is, I think, an affront to democratic sensibilities. Even without changing the constitution, we can just reduce all GRCs to 3 and then have single member constituencies. All is needed is political will.
No, it's not just that. I think basically you can just make sure that the vote count is based on subdivisions, not just based on GRC level. That will give you a firmer idea of how the ward, the subdivision MP did. Then you don't have all these speculation. Yeah, and they have it. I mean, it's not as though they don't. In fact, I would tell the opposition, you should start the ball rolling. You
Yeah.
know yours,
Yeah.
definitely, you know. So why don't you give me yours, and then,
Yeah.
you know, then you can basically make an argument that basically we should open it up to all.
Right. We
Yeah.
also want to spend a good amount of time later on talking about the points that you've raised, both of you have raised, which is that a lot of what needs to be done can't be done within the campaign period, right? So, for example, reviewing how boundaries are run, reviewing PA and CC governance and so on, right? It's too late to start thinking about it once the writ of election is
Yeah.
is out.
Correct.
So let's talk about that. Media, thanks for bringing it up. That's actually the subject of our next segment. But before we let you go, Walid, I do want to tap your deep knowledge of the WP and ask what you think, or what you think should be the case regarding how they would use their two NCMP seats, because of course they've got 4 individuals to choose from.
Yeah. So I do think that, firstly, just shout out to Faisal Manaf. I think he single-handedly carried the Tampines team, and there was a significant swing in favor of the WP. And if anyone has been to Tampines, Tampines is one of the better managed estates. So for him to be able, for WP to get that swing in Tampines is not insignificant. So for the NCMP seats, I think the WP traditionally uses it as a breeding ground, or to familiarize their new candidates with a Singaporean. So I do not think Faisal will be an NCMP, nor do I think he wants to, nor do I think he should. I think it would probably be Michael or Eileen,
Okay.
just based
Well, they can
on
have both, right?
thinking
Can't
about
they
the
have both?
future. So the other one would be Andre, presuming that Andre is from Jalan Kayu and they want to get Andre in. So then one person from the Tampines team, and that would be either Michael or Eileen. Michael has already got based on his performances online. So I would think Michael is the odds-on favorite. So I'm just thinking whether they also want to give more exposure to, and maybe put a woman.
I disagree slightly
candidate.
with you, Malay. I would disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
I think Elaine may be a stronger candidate rather than Michael. Just
So
because
I was gonna talk about Elaine actually. So I think that that is a possibility as well. I suspect, I haven't talked to any of them. I suspect they would put Michael, but if I were them, I would put Elaine.
Just to reiterate the point that Walid made, I mean, for those in the audience who don't follow these things as closely, can you remind us how the NCMP system has actually been an important stepping stone, which kind of to help overcome the familiarity hurdle that Yenn was talking about. Yeah,
Right. So
started with Sylvia, right?
yes. So there have been 3 NCMPs from the WP that eventually became became elected MP. So the first one was Sylvia Lim, and by her own characterization, she said she benefited a lot from the NCMP scheme, even though the WP opposed the NCMP scheme. But she personally benefited from the airtime, from the coverage in the media that she got. The other 2 are Gerald Giam and Leon Pereira. Both of them eventually became elected MP. So I think there is no substitute for that. Basically, you get the media coverage, and now parliamentary debates are up. I mean, Leong Man Wai is a household name because of his NCMP position. So that's how WP has benefited from the NCMP scheme.
Wow, thank you so much. So we have to say goodbye to Walid because he is heading to book talk at the Projector, which is, of course, is a very arty place, which explains why Walid is wearing black now. For no other reason. Yeah, just to clarify that.
we're going to parachute him to the Projector, right?
So Walid's a new book, in case you're one of the few people in Singapore who hasn't heard about it, is the national bestseller, Why Palestine? So thank you for writing that book, and those of you who don't have it yet, please sign up for the waiting list. I'm not even sure if it's still available.
Thank you for. Yes, it is back on shelf. Yeah, I think thank you for this group therapy.
So thanks, Walid, and so we'll say goodbye to the W part of the BMW team. Bertha, stay on. Yenn will
Yeah.
join us later. I will now welcome Natalie Tang. Wonderful. This is going so smoothly. Wonderful. Thanks so much for my very cooperative panelists. Natalie Pang is with the Communication and New Media Department of the National University of Singapore. She has studied for many years the digital landscape in Singapore, including all those sexy topics like social media and influencers and so on. And of course, Bertha at one level is a social media influencer, but also has deep mainstream media experience. So I can't think of two better people to discuss our next topic, which is the media, right? What direction do you want to go in? Maybe let's start with you, Natalie. We haven't heard from you yet. There was talk about social media being some kind of equalizer. If it is, there seems to be no big impact. What's your take in general?
Actually, it's a pity Walid has left because I would like to disagree with one of the points he made.
Okay, go ahead, and he can't.
I think so. I think the point he made was how social media favors the opposition. I actually disagree with that. It may have favored the opposition at one point, especially in the beginning. I think back to maybe the 2011 election, or maybe even a little bit of a 2006 election, right? But I think if we look at especially how the PAP has been using social media in the last 5 years, I don't think it necessarily favors the opposition. So I think one of the things that people often ask me is about the democratic potential of social media, about how it can actually give voice, amplifies unheard voices and all of that, right? But I think one of the things we must also remember is that social media platforms, they kind of mirror a market economy. And in a market economy, right, but instead of goods and services, we are trading attention and engagement. And this can favor parties with resources. Once they understand what kind of content sticks, right? Once they can also kind of mobilize actually networks, right? And this can include content creators such as podcasters and influencers to kind of also amplify their content. And I think this is one of the points I want to make, right? In response to Walid's earlier point that social media favors the opposition, especially in the last few years, I actually think that the PAP is much more ready, right, to use social media.
And this, I think, actually is a global misunderstanding and a global trend, right? I think probably up till the early 2010s, it was assumed that the internet was a great democratizer. But after that, we saw around the world that no, actually autocrats are perfectly capable of harnessing the power of the net. Yeah, and as you say, tend to have more resources than challengers make use of it. Yeah, but I guess just to nuance the argument a bit, it would be still correct to say that with social media or the internet in general, it is no longer possible for the government or any authoritarian state to shut out the opposition. Yeah, so they can still at least have a foot in a way that they wouldn't have had. Yeah. Media. Yeah, Bertha, your take?
Yeah, because I think what is it's not whether or not the social media favors the opposition. It's just social media has given them the opportunity to be heard and to amplify whatever they say. And I know the ruling party has the resources. Now you see some of its TikTok and whatever, we're all coming out of our ears, in front of our eyes, right? But I think people also know that these are orchestrated, scripted, to make them look familiar, right? Relatable, right? I place more value in, in the more free flow kind of discussions on social media. So podcasts, for example, I think at least you see them in an unscripted environment. They have to answer questions. I think some conviction or less conviction or passion can come through. Now, the problem is we have to distinguish, podcasts and social media is a bit like the online version of rallies, So basically, you can have a lot of reach, big reach and a lot of likes, doesn't necessarily translate to anything on the ground. So we have to be careful, not to conflate the two. It's just like rallies, right? And so basically, you are more or less speaking to the converted or speaking to the interested, but not necessarily speaking to the right audience. And the PAP, I think, realizes, the PAP, you may say, have cotton on the social media game, but it's only recently that they have come onto podcasts. I mean, to me, it was remarkable that, the Prime Minister sees it okay, has to make the time to go on a podcast on the last day of campaigning. No, so we shows that they do have some, they want to do something there. They know that it's going to be bigger and bigger.
Right.
But I don't think
And
social media has much effect.
right. There are podcasts and there are podcasts, right? I think
Of
it's,
course, of course.
I'm not sure how, well, even for
Yeah.
someone like me who follows it, it is actually quite hard to understand their business models, their ethics, and so on, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Are some of them pay for play? In other words, the newsmaker gets to actually dictate the content of the interview, and it's actually paid and favors or money is exchanged. Are there others that are actually behaving in a more journalistic way? Natalie, do you have a sense of what that landscape is?
Yeah, in fact, I feel that there are so many podcasts. I would call this a podcast election, right? There have been so many podcasts. Somebody created a podcast tracker of all the podcasts that was going on. I tried to follow all of them. It was impossible. So I also think that maybe during this election, like I said, there are podcasts and there are podcasts, right? And I kind of also think that maybe this election, uh, it wasn't just the podcast, it was also all the memes, all the uh, sort of spectacle in a way that was created. I do feel that voters are kind of distracted, right, and also overwhelmed, and they pay attention very much to uh, those they have been actually following already even before the election. So I think this is also coming to my also other point is that social media is a long game. So for political parties, right, it's very much like walking the ground is a long game. So for political parties, they got to understand that, or even just creating viral content actually does not really help. And yeah, for certain parties like the PAP, they have been actually playing this long game for quite a number of years, and so that when it came to the election, it actually mattered.
What about the role of mainstream media then? I mean, we're talking about
Let's
social media.
before we
Yeah.
move on to just one more question to ask to Natalie about social media. We often think about we often have the impression, I guess correctly, that that social media space, the internet space in Singapore is over-regulated, right? Because we see things like POFMA and so on. But isn't it also the case that in some respects it's under-regulated? Because, for example, we know that the state quite correctly has...
Sorry, Cherian, you're breaking up. I couldn't hear your question.
In some senses, the internet space is under-regulated. I'm wondering if you agree, because the state has said correctly, I think, that there is a public interest in things like transparency. So we need to know if something is paid for or not, right? We need to know who's behind these things. We need to know more about algorithmic methods to manipulate public opinion and so on. Some of these regulations kick in only during the campaign period. The rest of the time, they seem to be under-regulated. Have you looked at other countries or other possibilities to make sure that our online space actually is better managed? Natalie?
Yeah, so I think yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I that's a great question. I think the elections advertising rules, right, that were amended to actually require content creators to actually declare if something's been paid for and all that. But one of the questions that's actually kind of outstanding for me is also, what about content that's been paid for and created way before the election? Yes. So yeah, that part is actually unclear to me in terms of what kind of disclosure, what kind of like declarations are needed.
And this seems like a huge
So that's
loophole.
an outstanding question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a huge loophole. And it's bound to favor parties with much more resources to sort of carry out
Yeah,
a years-long campaign, as opposed to those who only have resources to do it closer to elections.
yeah, I think so. And it goes back to my earlier point about how resources matter, right? And parties with resources, they have the means to actually not just create content at scale, and it's all kinds of content, right? Not just podcast. And they also have the means to actually mobilize such content across different networks.
Right. Okay, let me turn, Bertha, to your favorite topic, mainstream media. Yeah.
I just basically wanted to ask Natalie if, how she thinks the mainstream media role is, compared to the social media side. I think I've said before that I think the mainstream media looks like it's best at collating facts and putting information out. So you want to know who's questioning, who's standing where, who won how much, and they're very good at it because they have plenty of resources for that sort of thing. But I think what was sorely lacking this round was commentary and any analysis at all. And I don't know, maybe I say I can understand the difficulties of doing something like that when you're mainstream media and you have the government on your back. So I know that. But there are some things which I think you can do professionally, like not just repeat report lah. And here is where I take issue with a lot of the reporting, because some things are not explained and some background is not given. And usually it's those which are unfavorable to the PAP that is not given, So the whole NTUC Alliance thing, right? I mean, SM talked about, Voters Party and all that. He didn't reckon that, social media will pick it up, do the checks, check Hansard, put it out and say, this is why, whatever, So they don't seem to be doing that due diligence, like the master plans. I think it's perfectly legitimate for mainstream media to ask how much of this master plan is master state, and how much of it is town council, how much of it is CCC, so that kind of debt we're not being given. So you are told actually really very big slogans, and you have to take it in. No, I told podcasters that, the day they can do that kind of thing, I'll be very happy. But if they are going to stick to just views, rather than anything more, then they will just remain as, I mean, views are free opinions are free, but if they could come down to that level of some kind of expertise, that would be very good for Singapore.
Because that, after all, is something nobody else can do, right?
Yes.
They are getting a heck of a lot of taxpayer money to maintain a very large army of full-time professional journalists. So if they're not actually spending the time to do the kind of actually quite basic background checking, compilation.
Correct.
Then who's going to do it? There is nobody.
Exactly. Who's going to do it? I mean, basically, I read the whole report on the parliamentary report card, for example, right? That was done by Kate, right?
The volunteers, yeah.
Volunteers, it's perfectly legitimate for the street side to do it, and do it a lot more comprehensively than what it did.
Yeah.
And and so this means that essentially, frankly, I think that if more of it came out, people would be more aware of, what is diversity, what are views, what is asking questions, the parliamentary aspects of an MP. Yeah.
Then you have Kirsten Han doing again something that
Correct.
the media should have done, which is very deep comparison of the manifesto.
Manifestos. The thing is this, you see, social media must also ask this question, no? A lot of the PAP side is talking about talk. Why y'all talk? No action, talk. You know, basically you cannot dismiss talking as part of the political process. But that seems to be something that people resonate, I mean, it resonates with people. But you cannot do that. I mean, you must hear ideas, and you then you go and test it out. But you must have ideas.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Yeah,
Social media
Bertha,
can really bring that dimension.
You started out. You prefaced your comment as a question with Natalie, although it's actually more.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask Natalie if you do have something to say to that.
I want to
Yes,
talk out,
I do have something.
Good, yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Bertha. That was great. And I think this is where we must actually really look closely at the relationship between social media and mainstream media. I think social media has that, I think we've talked about this before, has that potential to actually allow certain views to be heard, right? And like I said, political talk is incredibly important. And that's really what I feel a podcast has been doing. Some podcasts have been doing exceedingly well, but on social media, information often are distributed in the context of networks, right? Algorithms help a little, right? So long as there's enough people engaging with that content, but if mainstream media don't pick it up, right, it rarely gets circulated beyond that particular network.
We will need to wrap up on media very soon. As I say that with a heavy heart because Bertha and Natalie, you know how much I care about it. But I'm not going to let it go without making one point, which I think addresses a common comeback to critics like Bertha, which is that, surely the mainstream media has always been like this. What are you complaining about? Including back in the day when Bertha, you and I were in. So occasionally I try to look back at the archives and look at how we used to do it. And I think we are right that there is a difference, right? So let me just show you the Straits Times page 1, the day after the last rallies. This was it. Main photo, PAP. Above the fold, boat stories, PAP. Okay. And this is supposedly on cooling off day when you're not supposed to try and influence it. Okay. So I thought, okay, let me check. Maybe it was as bad before, right? So I looked up the equivalent date, the morning after the last rallies in 2011. Yeah. Apologies for the low res. I couldn't go to the National Library to get the high res one. This is what it looked like, 2011. Yeah. The last day, in fact, this is polling day, yeah? A neutral headline telling the news, not just giving the PAP's point of view, hot contest in key GRCs. Look at the main image. Again, the most newsy image they could project. Giorgio, Low Tia Kiang, face off, Al-Junaid. I mean, the contrast is dramatic, right? This is what we got last week. This is what we got in 2011. Yeah. So I don't think critics like Bertha, is making it up, right? That something fundamentally wrong has happened. Yeah. And if you want to know why it has happened, well, we can only speculate, but I should provide this additional background that this version of the Straits Times, 2 editors ago, 2011, the editor was Han Fu Kwang. Yeah. 6 months after this, and of course, 2011 was a disappointing election for the PAP. 6 months after this, Han Fu Kwang lost his job. Yeah, and I think it is not unreasonable for any subsequent editor to think that, well, that's what's going to happen to my career if I attempt a neutral, newsy page 1. On the most crucial day of the campaign. Yeah. So let me just leave that there and thank Natalie for spending time with us. Bertha, I'm going to say goodbye to you for a short while. You can come back later. And I'm going to welcome our next 2 guests, Yenn Chong, political scientist from NUS, Net4, and Imran, Mohammad, Taib. Wonderful. You're both here. Imran is a well-known scholar and civil society organizer. He is, I want to make sure that I get his, he's got so many credentials that I pick the right one. Imran is founding director of Dialogue Center Limited. And he writes on issues of race and religion, particularly on issues affecting Malay society. And I think I want to start with you, Imran, because, and I'm glad I got you on, because Lawrence Wong yesterday in his press conference actually devoted quite a bit of time to the issue of elections and race politics and identity and so on. What is your take on that?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I think firstly, we have to acknowledge that race still matters to many people on the ground. And if we think that race doesn't matter, then probably we are living in our own bubble. And therefore, the question of whether the system takes into consideration of this reality, as argued by some government leaders, or the system itself perpetuates or heightens the racialization, might be moot at this stage. So to me, it's not about bringing race into the picture. And throughout the election campaigning period, we saw how race was quite central, particularly in Tampines, right, with memes of Faizal Manap versus Masagos. So it's not about bringing race into the picture, but it's how it's being brought into the picture. And that's the particular concern. We've seen, for example, during the campaigning period of the Malay ground, calling for more Malay-Muslim voices to be heard, to be represented in Parliament. And this somehow evokes the memory of the collective leadership saga also of the AMP convention some years ago.
This was in the early 1990s, yeah?
Yeah, and up to 2000 actually. Right. So I think we just have to acknowledge that race do matters to many people on the ground. But it's how it's being discussed, it's how it's being brought up. That's where the concern is.
Right. Yenn, thoughts on this?
Right, I agree with Imran that race matters. But I guess I also agree that the way that race matters is and is discussed is important. What I noticed from this election, I mean, it was even prior to the election, was I was looking at Alia Mata's campaign. So she was running in Punggol. Of course, she had talked about the Ministry of Education module on Palestine and how it was unsatisfactorily done for her, and she wanted consent, which I thought was a pretty reasonable point. I mean, she also raised the point that for sexuality education in our schools, it's done with parental consent as well. Now, that was her point, but I think the media and also the public kept on trying to shoehorn her into this sort of single issue candidate because she's a Muslim woman, because she brought up Palestine, and also you get commentary like, oh, these Malay-Muslim people, they are just emotional. I mean, on some level, this is the perpetuation bit, right? There's a certain stereotype that people have in their minds that just gets reinforced. And this is where I think some of the way that we talk about race as seen through this election can be done better. Because I think for Palestine, if you look at the protests, the very small scale protests, peaceful protests that have happened around it, it's not strictly a racial or religious, it's not anymore, right? A strictly racial or religious thing. You see young people thinking that, this is also a humanitarian issue. It's an issue that it's not okay that you have civilians being bombed. It's not okay that you have a state violating international law. And for Singapore, for a country that talks a lot about international law, that should be pretty much part of the course. So I think that race and all that is important, but it has this sort of element that for people, they have an idea about how it ought to work or how it ought to work in Singapore in the past, and that needs to be updated to some of those realities. So I thought that element was quite interesting. It's a bit separate from the point that Imran brought up.
Right.
Yeah, I will agree.
One reason why I think this discussion is so valuable is that nuance tends to get lost in the heat of the hustings, right? So when issues like this are brought up in the elections, it tends to be dealt with in a very binary way. Yeah. And I think what, listening to Imran and Yenn, what strikes me is that both of you are right in different ways, yeah, about different things. So, and they can be both right together. What I gather, I'm sure I'm over summarizing you, Imran, is that there is reason to be concerned about the way race and religion are sometimes talked about among citizens, within the Malay-Muslim community. Yeah.
That's
and it's
a
right to be
good concern.
concerned.
Yeah.
But I think I equally can see Ian's point that the way people respond to it might unfairly stereotype Muslims, number one, right? Might in fact be politicizing the issue more than it needs to be, number two. And worst of all, could actually be deliberately or as a convenient byproduct, activating Islamophobia among non-Muslims who hear this talk about, here are Muslims getting worked up about this, and that kind of frightens me. Yeah, I better go back to my safe ground. Yeah, and I think both of these things can be equally true. Yeah, there could be a problem within the Muslim community, but there could equally be a problem with politicians making it to be a bigger issue than it is. Would I be right?
I think you're right. And I would want to add one more point. I mean, we can't let a discussion about race and religion go on without the very unfortunate comments by Wong, right, towards Arifin Shah, this on the SDP side. This is another element of what we're talking about. The sort of Islamophobia and the sort of stereotyping. What we saw in Wong's comments was also that stereotyping, right? That there was a view that, okay, well, you sort of make fun of minorities and their names and all, it's okay. It's clearly not, right? But that is something that as a society we need to work on. And I thought what was even more disheartening was when Arifin was trying to discuss his experience, and then you had this heckler on the ground, which was telling him to move on and to shut up, essentially, which I thought was also a very unfortunate aspect of how race and religion comes up. For I think the majority, sometimes it's very easy, not just the nuance, but it's very easy to just dismiss and think what minorities hold as important. Just think that, oh well, it doesn't affect me, so it doesn't matter. This applies to whether it's Muslims or people of South Asian heritage or any other minority. That is something that we seriously need to work on. It came up during COVID, and these episodes are examples of them coming up again. And I think it suggests that these are areas that we need to think more seriously about and treat more seriously, rather than to just sort of pretend that they don't exist and to shunt aside. Yeah.
Right. Imran, I did see you post about, in the heat of the exchange about Nur Deros, the sort of, I guess, radical preacher who had been associated himself with WP, and this attracted a lot of controversy. You said something about, you appreciated the WP leader, Pritam Singh, coming out to clarify. You would have welcomed an equally strong visible response from Faisal Manap. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, firstly, I must say that I'm quite invested in this, in the sense that I do know Nordros as well as Zulfikar Sharif, who go by the moniker Zainal personally. So there's been a lot of exchanges in the past. So in that sense, I have perhaps information that maybe others may not have. But with reference to my posting, I think firstly, when throughout the GE campaigning period, the framing of Malay-Muslim voice to me is very problematic, in the sense that it tends to see the Malay-Muslim voice as one monolithic and unified voice, and we saw how this was hoisted then upon the shoulders of some of the Malay-Muslim opposition candidates, who perhaps have their own pet topics and worldview that may not be totally representative of the entire community too. And some of the issues that were brought up in Parliament by our Malay opposition leader may not also be representative of the entire voice of the community. So it's only a segment of the community, and therefore we should not overhype this whole issue about Malay voice and representation of Malay voice. And this is the complexity that I alluded to that cannot be reduced to this binary position. And let me add my discomfort here on this matter when I saw some of my friends actually sharing Nodaros and Zulfika's posts. And I contacted some of them and I asked, do you know who these figures are? And how they operated within the Malay-Muslim community? And they had no clue. And only on the surface level of what was put up by the media. And yet they carry and platform the messaging of this Malay-Muslim voice that is to try to champion. So it makes me question whose voice are we referring to, and what impact will this voice have on the community? At the very least, find out the contestations in the community in terms of ideas, and be judicious when we want to actually raise Malay-Muslim voices at the national level. Because some of these voices may just be toxic, and we won't know this until we get deeply involved in community issues and be exposed to the discourse within the Malay-Muslim community itself.
Right.
But
I have
can I
to
comment?
confess that I myself am not totally familiar, certainly not with Nodaros. I know Zulfika's background, of course, has been an ISA target and so on. As someone who has not followed these debates, within the Muslim community for the way you have, I must say that the only reason why they suddenly surfaced into prominence over the last couple of months was because of the Calvin Cheng affair, right? So my reading of it is that if there's a lesson to be learned, is that what you call toxic individuals, so people with more extreme views, will take advantage of a vacuum in dangerous ways. And then we've got to ask ourselves, wait, how was that vacuum created? How was it possible that these two individuals suddenly appeared as some of the most reasonable voices on this issue? They have other toxic views, but on this particular issue, on Calvin Cheng's outrageous hate speech, they were in fact the most reasonable, righteous, rightfully outraged voices, and that was the reason I shared them on WhatsApp and so on. Yeah, I myself did. Yeah. So isn't the lesson that the so-called moderates, including political leaders, should have been far swifter in expressing this deep sense of outrage, quite justified outrage at what was an atrocious breach of social norms. Yeah, they didn't need 2 weeks to do the calculations about whether they need to respond. I mean, Lawrence Wong's eventual response was correct, but why wasn't it not made 2 weeks earlier? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you, Cherian. I think there are several factors here. One is, I think there is a lack of public intellectuals within the Malay-Muslim community who actually raise issues, discuss issues on such matters. Why there isn't many, that's something else to be discussed somewhere else. Secondly, I think we need to start having more platforms for discussion on public issues like this instead of just having it closed door. And because when you have it closed door, then it's open to selected few who tends to be there because they are somewhat representative of the community. And people who felt left out, then they need to carve out their own space, or they just go outside openly. I think we need to have more public engagement that is open, but at the same time also, of course, we put in some safeguards that it doesn't end up as an unproductive dialogue. So people actually need that. And because of the absence of it, especially at the height of Calvin Cheng saga, and including on Palestine issue, people just simply poured their pent-up frustration, and it just shows during the campaigning period.
Right. Thank you so much. Well, Imran, one of the reasons why I was very keen to do this these 2 hours is to introduce some of my friends whom I most deeply admire to a wider community. I mean, you're of course well known within some circles, not well known enough among other circles. So I hope that those who are listening in will recognize Imran as a hugely important voice in civil society and national life, follow him on social media, etc. And we'll continue to learn from individuals like you in between elections and not just pay attention during elections, right? So thank you so much, Imran, for joining us, and stay tuned while we continue to take this discussion in yet new directions. And for this, I'm gonna welcome everyone else who's in somewhere lurking. That would be Kenneth Paul Tan, Donald Low, Teo Yu Yenn, and I hope I've not left out anyone. If I have left out anyone and I didn't mention a name, please join it anyway. So thanks, Imran. Bye. Okay, guys. So where shall
Cherian, before we go on, I just want to say
yeah,
something
please.
else
Sure.
about in response to what Imran had mentioned. I think it's to understand what different communities in Singapore are saying and how the debates within them work is highly important. But in Singapore, we're so cloistered. So I think if you're not within the Malay-Muslim community, it's hard to understand what's going on. And I think that is a pretty serious issue that we need to grapple with more generally.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely. Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Okay, so guys, you know, I feel I should just take a back seat now and let you guys talk and moderate as little as possible. So the question is,
Q&A also.
Yeah. So let's start with some of the issues that we started out the election with, you know, thinking that these are key election issues and maybe were or weren't. How about inequality, the cost of living inequality and so on, that all parties seem to agree that it's an issue. In the end, cost of living was discussed, inequality wasn't really. And of course, there's no better person to pitch this question to than Teo Yu Yenn, fellow Academia SG editor, sociologist at NTU and author of This Is What Inequality Looks Like. Yu Yenn?
Thank you, Cherian, and thanks everyone who spoke earlier. I learned a lot in the past hour. So I think in many ways inequality did get a sustained airing, although I think, as Cherian pointed out, in ways that are maybe not super direct. But I think it did get very sustained airing and in quite a range of ways. And I think we can think of it both in terms of certain advances to the debate and certain limitations. It was really embedded within discussions that issues that ordinary people care about. So cost of living, housing, retirement adequacy, healthcare, even education. And opposition parties in particular really highlighted that there is unevenness and there is unfairness in terms of people's access to the things that they need. And I think in putting inequality within issues that a broad electorate is affected by and that a broad electorate cares about, we saw talk of inequality going beyond reference to poverty or reference to marginalization of only a minority group of people. So there was instead a really strong emphasis on the gap between a small minority elite class and a broad middle and working class. Apart from highlighting class inequalities, if you will, there were also, especially in the party manifestos, references to the need to address inequalities that occur around other principles of division, such as gender, ethnicity, and age. So I think we really saw that inequality was framed as a broad-based problem for society, not so much a problem just for a limited group. And related to that, perhaps because inequality was discussed as a problem for a broad public, for everyone in society, there was also more explicit talk about the need for structural and systemic solutions. And here we see this really in the party manifestos especially. There were more proposals aimed at changing the rules of the game, not just at how to dish out more cards to groups with fewer cards. In fact, some opposition parties were quite explicit in critiquing the ruling PAP for approaching the problem with band-aids or patches without stronger commitment to systemic change. And when I say that parties propose structural changes, changes to the rules of the game. What I mean is that they talk not only about how to address the immediate needs of specific groups. Well, of course, they did that as well. But I think they also pointed out that, you know, the broader logics and principles that underpin how public resources are accumulated, how public resources are redistributed, these were also important. So, for example, we saw, you know, SDP propose primary healthcare services to be paid through risk pooling system, suggesting a different model of distribution that's more collectivist and universal. WP proposed minimum wage. They also proposed things like a standing committee to evaluate cost of living issues, suggesting that they think there needs to be a sustained consideration of how to deal with problems beyond what existing policy frameworks are doing. So I think the attention to structural changes and the first point I made about the embeddedness of inequality and broad public social issues are really related. It's only when a problem is framed as one shared by a majority of the population that you can also follow with the argument that, you know, really big systemic changes are needed. I'll stop there for now because I think maybe Donald and Kenneth might want to jump in.
Yeah, is there, I mean, I guess it's a more open question. Is there a danger that the kinds of discussions that we've had, the kinds of reframing of issue, the look at structural changes and so on, will now just be swept under the carpet because the election is interpreted as a resounding mandate, which basically could be read as a signal for business as usual? Yenn or Kenneth?
I'm not sure that it would be swept under the carpet. In fact, I think it would gain more salience, right? Because the sense of inequality in the way that Yenn has presented it is not just a material condition, right, of not having access to things, you know, not being able to afford things in the same way that other people seem to be able to afford things, but also the sense of being treated unequally in the society based on who you are, right? It's the recognition of who you are as an individual. And that speaks, I think, very directly to a sense of dignity, respect, and that will kind of, you know, circulate in the everyday life experience of everyone. I don't think these feelings of being disrespected, disregarded, not listened to suddenly disappears because the votes show these numbers, right? Votes are very crude measures of things. I want to add maybe a third dimension of inequality, which I hope would disappear, is the one that I think may disappear. And it's the sense of, how do I put it? The sense of political inequality. You know, and I thought that this time around people would be much more sensitive to the unfairness of the political system. You know, yeah, we live in a democracy, you know, it's produced these results, we respect the results and we have to live by them. But, you know, it's not the fairest of democracies, right? And, you know, whilst we accept the results, we need to question the rules of the game, right? How they have been manipulated in certain ways. And we've talked about it in the last hour, things like political boundaries and electoral boundaries, GRCs, you know, the kind of politicization of the grassroots, media access, all these kinds of things that directly speak to just the completely unlevel playing field of politics here. You know, if you're on the right side of the field, you don't even have to do anything. You know, gravity alone will give you all the scores that you need, right? So I thought that this a heightened sense that, you know, the rules of the game are not fair, right? And the visibility of the unfairness of these rules would kind of really strike at one of the most foundational bases of moral intuition, which is, you know, we all don't like cheating, right? We all seek fairness in some ways. It's really deep and intuitive and visceral. And to see it play out in this kind of way, I thought would trigger something a bit more political. But I think my sense is that this aspect of inequality probably at this stage in our political development probably only manifested at the level of affect. You know, it felt like we were an affective public, right? A group of people who felt aggrieved by a system that was so blatantly and egregiously redesigned, right? Continually redesigned to favor one party over the others, and the participation in this emotional outpouring, right, maybe didn't translate into action, so the votes didn't reflect that. But I do think that this broader sense of inequality, right, is deep. It doesn't disappear, and if it's kind of lurking and accumulating in a subterranean way, one day it will explode, and hopefully it explodes in positive directions and positive transformations rather than.
Maybe I have a slightly more positive take on that it actually is palpable and has had an effect. But before that, I want to ask, but first of all, in case I just assume everybody knows who's Kenneth. Kenneth is Kenneth is my colleague at Hong Kong Baptist University, where he's a professor of media and politics. Donald Low, another person who has found refuge in Hong Kong, although I understand are you in Taiwan now? I have no idea. But Donald is at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Donald, your thoughts?
I'm trying to pick up on Kenneth's point about, and Yenn's point about political inequality. I think, as Kenneth pointed out, it's institutionalized. I mean, people talk about gerrymandering and how it favors, obviously, the PAP. That's true, but that misses the bigger picture, which is that the GRC system has created and institutionalized barriers to greater political participation and political competition, right? I mean, you showed statistics to show that in these elections, in the seats that the Workers' Party contested, they actually won a majority of votes. But when it comes to seats, they have only gotten 39% or 38% of the seats they contested. And that's a result of the way the GRCs are drawn in such a way that favors the ruling party, right? You take, for example, Tampines. I'm pretty sure that the Workers' Party won at least 2, maybe 3 of the divisions. We don't know that, but the PAP's strong showing in, say, Baey Yam Keng's division probably carried the PAP through. And likewise in Punggol, it was Sun Xueling's strong showing in her division that carried the rest of the PAP team. So I think what the GRC system, and we don't mention this enough, is it has accentuated the already majoritarian aspects of this first past the post system. And people don't pay enough attention to those institutional forms of inequality because they've been around for so long. It's accepted as background, right? It has become normalized, what someone called normalization of the deviant. And so we focus on the salient things, or like how at each elections boundaries are redrawn, but that's really just focusing at the marginal tweaks in a fundamentally very unequal and institutionally unequal political system, right? So I agree with Cherian, actually, that these issues will be swept under the carpet because post-elections, precisely because of how these deviant practices have become so normalized, not just institutionalized, there isn't going to be enough political attention, energy, mobilize opposition, or even any sort of calls for the GRC system and for these institutional barriers to political fairness to be addressed.
Right. I want to
can I talk?
Sorry, please, yeah.
On Yenn's point, which I really appreciated, on how inequality in its various forms were expressed, even if the term inequality wasn't explicitly mentioned. I can't help but compare this with 2011, GE2011, when I think inequality was very explicitly mentioned. And there, it was not just inequality within Singapore, it's also inequality between locals and foreigners. These issues didn't get played up as much this time. Even on cost of living, which was mentioned, probably the most used phrase in this election was cost of living. I think it didn't land as strongly as the opposition thought it would. Partly because the PAP had already addressed or sought to address this in 2023, in 2024, and of course this year with the various VCR, right, voucher credits and rebates. And I think the PAP was quite effective on neutralizing the anger and the unhappiness over cost of living issues in a way that they hadn't been as effective back in 2011 on neutralizing issues around foreign labor, housing prices, and general inadequacy of public goods provision.
I'll go back to Kenneth's point about this kind of intuitive sense of injustice, the desire for fairness that we assume human beings all have. I actually think that it has been evident, and over the long term, the PAP has learned that there are some no-go areas, right? So things that we used to take for granted in the past, like for example, trying to blackmail constituencies by telling them that their constituencies would, go into the dumps and have fewer services and so on if they voted opposition, that you would repent and regret and so on. Notably absent this time around. Yeah, there are things that the PAP used to say that it now knows will backfire. So it seems to me that they have picked up that there is a line, that Singaporeans do have the sense of basic fairness, that they're going to react very badly if the PAP crosses. Yeah. Related to that, one thing that I found notably absent when the PAP was dealing with the Workers' Party was that they never questioned the WP's credentials. Very interesting, right? They never questioned. The most they could say was that, what did Lee Hsien Loong say? He said, don't just judge them as individuals, judge them as a party, which was an implicit acknowledgement that as individuals, they're pretty good. And I think even the PAP knew that it would land badly if they made the kind of personal attacks that they used to in the past. So I do find that the electorate does, has some.
It's a very low bar. It's a very low bar. They have to be
Cherian, you're being very generous. And in any case, right, that could have been tactical. That can be tactical, right? If you point to your opponent's credentials and those credentials happen to be better than some of your own, then that's going to be an own goal, right?
Right. Let me ask another, since I lost that debate. Let me change the subject quickly, right? So yeah, we are at this stage where we are not sure what kind of lessons the PAP will draw from this, if any, right? Lawrence Wong explicitly promised to reflect and learn. He didn't actually say what they will learn, yeah? I kind of agree with Donald that they probably will learn nothing about the need to open up politically. My guess is that if they know what's good for them, they will hear the grievances on the ground about more material things, and that we can expect some changes in policy in the coming months. Yeah, it would be foolish not to. I think it would be foolish for the PAP to just go away with these top line numbers that it's it's a strong mandate, because the fact of the matter is that what this election showed, just like the last one, that if the PAP is confronted with credible, high quality opposition, votes are basically split down the middle. Yeah, half of Singaporeans are willing to side with the opposition. That's exactly what's happened in WP contested wards. Yeah, is the PAP that dense not to pay attention to that, Donald? I'm not sure why I'm asking you, but
are they that dense? Well, they're capable of being that dense. Whether they will be, it's a separate issue. I think on issues of redistribution, they are already headed, tentatively, gingerly in that direction. I mean, we're going to have unemployment protection, or at least institutionalized guaranteed unemployment protection. So it doesn't go as far as some of the things that the Workers' Party or even the Singapore Democratic Party has asked for. Yenn mentioned the SDP's proposal in having a more collectivist, universal approach in healthcare financing. I think the PAP won't head in that direction. They will at most make very minor tweaks to health financing. If anything, just increase government subvention rather than overhaul the health financing system. I do stand by what I said earlier. I think on the most issue that they felt what voters were concerned about, cost of living. I think the conclusion or the takeaway from these elections is they feel that they have effective or sufficiently addressed it. And then to the extent that it still is a lingering issue, they will address it in pretty much the same way through the VCR approach. Yeah.
Yenn, what more could be done, do you think, if indeed they are more sober in their assessment and they realize that they have not actually won the debate?
I'm not sure that I would think about it only in terms of what the PAP or the government will do, because I'm not privy to the kinds of discussions that happen within those circles. I think, I'm thinking back on the 9 days. I think part of why these 9 days get us also kind of interested and riled up and enthusiastic and also hopeful in many ways is partly because those of us who've been paying to social and political issues all year round have these 9 days when you feel, oh, other people are also paying attention. How wonderful, and I think that a lot of civil society groups or people in civil society, broadly speaking, right? Academics, activists, artists, journalists, whatever, who are doing the work year round will have to continue doing the work of trying to, in our own little spheres and whatever, trying to kind of further the debate and further the discussion and keep people's attention on it in various ways. I think for the reasons that were mentioned earlier today, that attention is going to be quite difficult to sustain, right? So structurally, we are, I think, pushing up against a lot of constraints. But I think if we can hold on to some of the attention that was indeed kind of rolled up during this period, and hold on to some of the kind of shifts in language and discourse that came up during this period, including by opposition parties who are very serious about challenging the status quo, serious about challenging, some of the status quo values and principles underlying our society, not just the kind of surface level policies. That if we can keep doing that work, then we can slowly chip away and kind of create changes in the directions we want to see them. So I don't think of this as just, obviously what happens in parliament and in politics, capital P politics, is super important and disproportionately impactful on our lives. But I think all of these other things that are happening outside of those spheres are also really important.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating issue because, of course, historically, I think Singaporeans who want to see more social and political progress and so on have traditionally been, maybe torn is too strong a word, but there's been this option, right? Do you do it through political society or civil society? And ideally, of course, you want both. There have been seasons when the politics looks hopeless and we invest more in civil society. There have been other seasons when there seems to be the possibility of political breakthrough and people are willing to volunteer for parties and so on. I don't know, Kenneth, Yenn, could you talk us through that relationship more between civil society and political society?
Yeah, sure.
Kenneth, yeah.
You want Yenn or?
Kenneth, please, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think I go back to a point that Yenn made about the language that we have for understanding our condition. I think that relationship between political life or political institutions, civil society, which includes, I suppose, academics, civil society activists, artists, and so on and so forth, right? I think it's the language that is importantly shaped in the relationship between the two, the language that we use to make sense of our condition, right? And for the longest time, that language has been somewhat controlled and narrowed, so that we only have one way of thinking about this, right? And therefore one solution for dealing with it. So it's not difficult, therefore, to win the game, the political game, if you are proposing that one solution that's on every person's mind, and then you show the technocratic ability to pursue it and to show results along the way. But with, I think, more energy flowing between and within civil society, political parties in reshaping this language, that I think is a very significant change. So we have multiple ways now of thinking about what's wrong here. And I suspect at one level, the PAP is probably quite convinced that it's got the right solution for this problem, right? And that the task, the main task that they have going forward is to treat this as a communication problem, to treat this as how do you explain to people, right? That although it may seem painful at this time, we've got your back, the use of care and together and all this kind of language, right? And then to say, just hang on, right? And we got all the principles in place and things will get better. I suspect there'll be more focus on how to get this communication going. But meanwhile, civil society, the young generation who are very, very thoughtful about these kinds of matters, are also evolving different vocabularies and different kind of frameworks for making sense of this. So to me, it's a long game, right? So it's the hearts and minds as well as just the political institutions and those kinds of changes. And I feel much more comforted in thinking that when change comes, the culture, the language, the hearts and minds are sort of ready, right? So that a change doesn't come and then, it happens in an uncompassionate way, or it happens in a way that's not sustainable. So to me, when I look at this in the long term, I'm optimistic about it.
Right. I guess that reminds me also that of the fact that we may be overburdening, we're putting too much on the shoulders of opposition parties, right? Because they can only go as far and as fast as the wider ecosystem allows. Yeah. And in relation to that, there's a question from Yan Ying Sim that I wonder if Ian would like to reply. Ying Sim asks, is there anything that we as citizens or members of society can realistically do to push back against unfair election practices?
So I guess where I'll begin is where Cherian left off. I mean, for democracy to work, it's actually pretty tiring. It doesn't stop at the ballot box. Citizens, if you are to be active citizens, have a responsibility and a role to be educated about the political system and the politics, and to exercise oversight, and also to demand the changes that they want. Now, political parties are vehicles for this, but it doesn't, and they can never replace the sort of broader popular voice. That's what democracies are about, right? It's that popular participation. What makes it tiring? I understand that it is easy to try to delegate to somebody. And in Singapore, we like to outsource a lot. You just think someone else will take care of it for you. But if you are invested in democracy, it just doesn't work that way. So to get back more directly to the question, then if we believe that there are unfair, normalized practices, laws, etc., then it's about trying to A, get them changed, and B, to figure out how to do so. It's not just necessarily just being out there and making claims and demands. In some places that will work, but in Singapore, perhaps we're not at that stage yet. So I suppose one thing is to let other people understand why these things are important to evolve. What's at stake here? So that gets back to an area that's close to my own heart. I think in Singapore, political education, media literacy, these kinds of things are not done as well as they should for a society that is as open and as advanced in many ways as we are. So if the idea is that there needs to be some reform, then people need to be brought on board. They need to understand what can be done better. And that education about what our system looks like now, where it can go, what are the channels for effecting peaceful and more stable forms of change, that conversation needs to go on. It can't just be a political party thing. That's where civil society and, more importantly, ordinary citizens need to get involved. But that's not something that we typically do in Singapore.
Right. In fact, one thing that did strike me, as someone who is more or less constantly tuned into politics, is how many issues are perennial issues, or problems that Donald described as structural, that many people who only tune into elections suddenly say, hey, how come like this? But hello, where were you? Where have you been, right? And the classic case is, of course, boundaries, right? I mean, it's surely too late to complain about boundaries when the report has come out. We need to look at the reform of the whole boundary drawing system starting tomorrow. Yeah,
right.
Same with worrying about unfairness in the media. Come on, 1 month before the elections is the wrong time to ask. How come the Straits Times like that?
Right. I think the other thing that struck me is how many people I meet just on the street are taken by the argument that, the PAP's mandate to rule is at stake, when it actually isn't. Just practically that wasn't even on the table at all. But surprisingly, just talking to regular people when I was trying to, buy food, like, I really don't want the PAP government to fall. I'm like, that's not even a practical possibility. But that shows a certain lack of understanding on a very general level about how a system works.
Which then allows this campaign to progress largely on, leveraging on people's ignorance of how it actually works. Right? Yeah. Donald, you are in Taiwan, which is, of course, a very different political climate and system. You spent time in Japan. Any thoughts on this wider political culture? I mean, let's forget about comparing ourselves with the West, but even compared with our East Asian neighbors, what is this cultural change that we need to see?
Taiwan or South Korea, when they democratized, it was very sudden, right? Or relatively sudden, but it was also peaceful, largely peaceful. But we have been able to portray those, that period of democratization as an unstable one, as one where it led to a lot of destabilizing conflicts and paralyzing conflicts. And if you visit Taiwan or Japan or South Korea, you see that they're really matured as democracies. It's not that there is no corruption. It's not that there isn't abuses of power. It's not that there isn't institutionalized entrenchment of the interests of the incumbent. But it's certainly not done to the same degree or the same extent. I think that's worth.
Citizens see their roles differently. Would that be correct to say?
I would say so, yeah. Certainly citizens feel they have more voice, more agency. Protests, even in Hong Kong, right, before COVID, we could see how protests were a legitimate expression of opposition. The other thing, of course, when we talk about change, it's not just external pressures and how citizens must get involved, how society must be better organized, civil society must be better organized. We also need somebody in government who is willing to champion those and push internally those reforms, whether it's political reforms or policy reforms of the sort that you, Yenn, speak about. I mean, after 2011, don't forget that there was a very important champion within the PAP, and that was the former Deputy Prime Minister, now President Tharman Shanmugaratnam. I just don't see in the PAP today, or the 4G that's expected to fully take over the reins of political power in Singapore after this election. I just don't see anybody who has got that sort of credibility or even the conviction to push through on the policy reforms, much less the difficult political ones that that would require undoing a lot of the features that give the PAP structural advantages. I don't know if fellow panelists feel the same way.
Right. I mean, it's a great segue to the final topic that we want to deal with in the last 15 minutes, for which I'm going to ask Bertha to join in again. as a close PAP watcher. I mean, we've always known that this election is less about the size of the opposition, right? I'm speaking in global terms, right? I mean, what is it we're talking about? Is it going to be 10 or 15? I mean, it's like, come on,
Yeah.
right? You know, the supermajority was never at risk and so on. It was always about what kind of political capital Lawrence Wong is going to emerge with out of this. Yeah. Political capital vis-a-vis his 4G colleagues, since he wasn't, in fact, the original first choice, and also political capital vis-a-vis legacy politicians, those from 3G, that some of whom continue to be in the cabinet. So what does this result do for him? Bertha, do you want to start with you? And what should he do with this internal mandate? Yeah.
Oh, okay. You know, actually, I worry more about what he will do, give what some people were saying earlier, that now that he has a strong mandate, then it's all systems go. I can't, you know, I sort of remember after 2015, it was a pretty strong mandate, wasn't it? And all the fierce, tough policies came through after that. And it does seem as though it was really going great guns based on the idea that it has a very strong mandate. So I'm hoping this won't come through. Now, the changes, you know, I think I've sort of given up lah. This whole thing about changing the institutions. I think I wrote in my book, GE2020, I hope something would change. It doesn't, right? Whether the on the EBRC, whether it's on the GRC, the role of the PA. The only thing that was not done, was POFMA wasn't exercised. So you know, that was wow, that was quite something. So POFMA was an exercise. So I suppose we have to be grateful for small mercies. But other things, unless people pick up the ball in between elections and run with, you know, the need to change all these things, it's not going to happen.
So you feel that actually thinking about the dynamics or the balance of power within cabinet is really no big, they're all the same. I'm beginning to think that they're all quite vanilla. You know, they're all about taste the same. I don't see, as I think Donald said, that I don't see any other figure. The only one I can see who looks like he's not really part of it is Ong Ye Kung. He seems to have taken a bit of gone off a bit in this campaign. Right.
You know, I mean, he was very strong fighting for his constituency, for Polisan. He tried to engage on health policy, and he's the one who said that the SDP at least offered some policy alternatives. So,
right.
You know,
right. I did notice that. Good. I mean, I was listening very carefully to the concession and victory speeches last night. Workers' Party, being the people that they are, consistently thanked their opponents.
Their opponents, correct.
On the PAP side, it was patchy, right?
Yeah,
Ong Kang gave very graciously, he's either an extremely good actor or very, very sincere, thanked his opponents. Grace Fu did. I didn't follow all of them, but Lawrence Wong did not.
Didn't. Yeah. I was expecting him to. Yeah. You know, in fact, he was trying to like comfort the Workers' Party by saying, "Hey, hello, you still got la, no, peace and all that."
And also, where after I intervened, you saw the error of your ways and you played. You know, that was the most he could do to be charitable to.
Yeah, that was the only somewhat charitable. But you know, I wish somebody he didn't say anything about the loss of the NCMPs. The whole PSP is gone. You know. So that I wish if he had said something, I would be quite happy, you know, because they did bring up, as NCMPs, a great deal of stuff in Parliament. So, you know, if you want to have like diverse parliamentary voices and all that, they tried to play that role, which is more than I can say for a lot of PAP backbenchers.
Right. Ian, what hopes do you have, or you know, what is possible in the dynamics not only within cabinet, but the other factor is, for example, could backbenchers be given more room, to express this diversity that Lawrence Wong says that he understands that Singaporeans want?
So I think one of the things that we tend to forget in Singapore is that MPs, they do the constituency stuff, but they are also representatives. They're elected representatives. And they are representatives of a pluralistic and diverse society. When we look at the debates, sure, you see different points being brought up, but at least in terms of what is visible, we don't see any amendments. We don't see what role these backbenchers have to play in shaping legislation. Legislation looks very much like something that for the most part, there have been some private member bills, but for the most part, something that the cabinet sort of has pushed, and everyone else just sort of endorses, right? And it's unclear in that kind of a setting how the diversity of voices have been represented. Yes, there are these closed door things that Imran talked about, but because they're closed door, no one can see them being done, and therefore no one knows whether they're being done or not. So I suppose that's one thing for Lawrence Wong to look at, right? In terms of, if he wants to bring the PAP forward to a different kind of politics.
Right. I mean, in the past, when they have acknowledged that that there's this appetite, and I start with this idea of a disequilibrium, right? I think, which is what I think is at the heart of the frustration among many Singaporeans. There's a clear disequilibrium, right? That between the at least 40% of Singaporeans, I would say at minimum 40% of Singaporeans who believe that the PAP should not be as dominant as it is, on the one hand, and the mere 10% of seats in parliament that are held by opposition. Yeah, it's a stark gap.
Right.
In the past, the PAP, I think, acknowledged this gap and tried to close it by increasing the number of NCMPCs and MPs and so on. Is there more that could be done along these kinds of lines?
Well, I think ultimately it will have to come back to the reforms that we talked about, and there's very little political will for it. Because NCMPs, yes, there's basically a guaranteed 12 opposition seats in parliament. What does 12 opposition seats get you? It gets you more questions. It doesn't mean that you get any change in legislation. There's no sort of practical effect, right, other than more debate. So I think that bit needs to be looked at. But I will also, the other point that I wanted to say is when the last bit of the question you asked me in the beginning is where I thought that the PAP might go. I think the temptation of power is a great one. So as Bertha had mentioned in terms of 2015, I expect that there'll be a lot of temptation to come down in ways that are hard on civil society and also on the opposition parties. I think also that alludes to some of the things that Lawrence Wong had said during the campaign about how he would not be able to govern if there were more opposition voices.
Right.
I mean, you're the prime minister of overwhelming majority. One of the key questions there would be, how much are you able to work across the political aisle and work across the political aisle, not for anything else, but for the sake of Singaporeans that you are supposed to be representing. That's one area where I will be watching, and I hope others do as well, to exercise our right of oversight as citizens.
Yeah, so I did that.
Cherian?
Yeah, Bertha, please.
Yeah. You were saying that what else can be done? I think that more can be made of the parliamentary process. I mean, okay, it took them a damn long time to make Parliament go live, but there are committees in Parliament. These committees should, be used as also a form of educating us about what MPs do. I mean, you have the Estimates Committee, you've got the Public Accounts Committee, you have the wonderful Select Committee to select MPs. Everything they do is so opaque. So, we don't get any idea of what MPs do, except that they're very quiet in Parliament. No, so all these other things are avenues also to educate politically and to show that the backbenchers are worth their money, so to speak. So that's something immediately that can be done. I think Lawrence Wong said something about GPCs, right? I think they remember in the old days when only four opposition seats were won. I think the PAP backbenchers, they sort of went overboard. They became more opposition than opposition. But now they have really pulled back all the way. It's like you're so scared to rock the boat. You let all your leaders take the heat and do the fighting and all that. And that doesn't say much about them as people who represent diverse voices.
Just a quick point. That in other parliaments, usually there are standing committees on different issues, and they will scrutinize bills before they even go for first reading. We don't have that in Singapore.
What you guys have been telling me about the way the PAP reacts to criticism, the way it sees shadows when there are none, the way it is so easily threatened, and how often this brings out the worst in them. You know, it reminds me of something I think Donald and I, we discussed when we were writing our book 5 years ago, PAP versus PAP, that in many senses, the PAP is its own worst enemy, right? Comment. Donald.
I mean, of your own worst enemies in a sense. In a number of ways, you saw that during the election campaign. I mean, first they go into the campaign saying, right, fresh team. And they say, yeah, look, we've got these 32 first-time candidates. I challenge any member on the panel, name me 5 of the new fresh-faced candidates, first-time candidates from the PAP, right, out of 32. 32 new candidates is more than the entire slate of Workers' Party candidates, 26. I'm sure all of it, each and every one of us can name more than 5, probably more than 10, WP candidates. It just shows, this is to Bertha's point, right, how they have backgrounded their new faces. You talk about renewal, you talk about fresh team, where are they, right? So that's how, at a very basic level, they are their own worst enemy in the sense that they don't portray or project the sense of optimism and renewal that they promise Singaporeans. And then over the course of the election campaign, rolling out these old timers from the 3G, even from the 2G, that is the worst possible message you can send to young voters, right? It's the message not of looking forward. It is really the message of, stick with the devil you know rather than the devil you don't know. And the worst thing, of course, is that at least superficially, this strategy worked. And so I think even if on deep reflection, the PAP realizes that, hey, there wasn't really a big swing to us, right? The big swing is, the high popular vote share has been flattered by the hopelessness of these minor parties, right? That, by the way, the minor parties contested in 62 seats. The major opposition parties only contested in 50. So in their more serious moments, in their more thoughtful, reflective moments, the PAP might say this is not a huge mandate, right? Certainly not a landslide, as Cherian mentioned. But instinctively, I think that what Yenn says about temptation to power and to exercise in a forceful way, that is very strong, right? So instinctively, emotionally, they want to flex, right? They're not going to engage in that sort of thoughtful, deliberative process of involving people, bringing on board, trying to reflect the diversity of society, engaging in deep policy as well as institutional change. I just don't see how it's going to happen. I just don't see how that change is going to happen with this supermajority that they have and the kind of increase in popular mandate that they now have secured.
Kenneth and Yenn, let's close with you guys addressing the same question. I mean, it often strikes me that, compared with most other countries when there are really deep ideological differences between parties, most of our main parties are pretty centrist, you're talking about center left, center right, or whatever, right? So that's another sense in which I mean that the PAP is its own worst enemy for imagining for some reason that giving in to quite modest requests for tweaks of its policies, whether it has to do with GST or cost of living or structural inequality and so on. It has a very dogmatic approach to giving in to these things. When it seems to be more of a mental block in itself than really something that would drain our reserves or compromise Singapore's economic competitiveness and so on. Do you get that sense? Kenneth first.
Yeah, I mean, two things, right? One is what you're implying, I think, is inability to imagine alternatives, to not just to give in to people's demands, but also to imagine some bigger other ways of thinking about this. and doing it. And I think that maybe is also indicated by the type of speeches we're hearing, which are kind of prayerfully cliched, kind of thoroughly unimaginative way of talking about our condition today. And I think that may indicate just how unable to see the world differently the elite has become. So that's one part of the problem, I think. The other part is maybe the small p politics, the kind of how do I ensure my hand is strengthened when I'm in power, and that I can keep the elite reasonably united and controllable, and those kinds of things, right? Because the other part of the story to do with a strong mandate is it also gives the party the luxury to fracture, right? You have not such a strong sense that you have to unite because they're barbarians at the gates, right? You now have this strength, and within this luxurious position, you can sort of, then your internal egos and rivalries and all of this may play out even more. So this kind of points towards an elite fracture, the old-fashioned elite fracture idea, right? So if the other part is the small politics and the calculations about change in the context of how do I maintain my control and power in a post-Lee Kuan Yew period.
Thanks so much. And finally, Yenn.
I wonder if I could answer your question by talking about the Workers' Party instead. By saying that, I when I was watching this particular campaign and hearing the Workers' Party, I think one thing that I really appreciated was that, although earlier I had said, right, that they went at issues at that very concrete material level, but I also feel like they went at it at sort of the level of values and logics. And this is something Kenneth pointed to as well. I think there are certain logics and values that permeate society when income and wealth inequality are very pronounced. And these are values around individualistic competition and jostling, status hierarchies, differential worth, right? And I was very struck by several opposition parties, but perhaps Workers' Party more than the others, pushing very directly and explicitly against these. So in their rallies, in their interviews, really references to, in some ways, counter values, respect and trust, community, interdependence, dignity, equal worth. Yeah. So it's not just that, we are absence of that, but also we represent this. And I think that is what we need in a society. That is the kind of politics we need. Not just we are not that, but also this is what we are, right? And these are values that are, have content. They're positive values. They're values around which you are trying to rally people around, not just to repel people against. And I think that is really important. And that is maybe, if we think after every election, we should be thinking about next election, even those of us who are not, in party politics, right? That we should be thinking about what's next and the work to be done between. I think those are the kinds of things that have the potential for people to coalesce around, that there are some deep critiques we should have about our society, deep critiques about values around competition, values around differential worth, right? And then the counter to that are sort of this attempt to bring back or bring to the forefront, more values that are about the greater good, about, how do we build a society for everybody? How do we build a better society around which people can feel we want to belong and we want to do our part?
Thank you. And I guess, although this panel, fair to say that we're not holding our breaths for Lawrence Wong to reflect and learn, these values, this different way of imagining Singapore. In theory, it is possible. It is within reach of a prime minister with a strong mandate, government with a strong mandate, to actually have the humility to learn some of this, even from the opposition. So, so with that, we have taken up our allotted 2 hours. It just leaves me to thank all our guests for spending time, Walid, Bertha, Natalie, Imran, Yenn, Kenneth, Donald, and Yenn. Thank you to the audience for spending time with us as well. If you like this event, please sign up for our mailing list. We'll be organizing a lot more the rest of the year and in coming years. And we wish you all the best. Wish the 15th Parliament all the best too. Expectations are high. Use your power well. Thank you. Bye-bye.